I don't think you need an MBA level education, but I do think you need a really profound understanding of the business pressures and the costs and resource allocation, which is different. And what I mean by that is you really need to understand, even as a relatively junior reporter or editor or copy editor, what the options are in terms of how you tell a story and how much those options cost, because actually the number of things you can now do are sort of almost kind of, you know, they're almost unlimited in terms of, you know, do you tell it on video, do you tell it on your own platform, do you use distributed tools which are free, what has the most impact? So I see a future where journalists have to have a really detailed understanding of what the implications of their decisions about the tools that they use and how they tell stories impact actually on the cost of what they're doing. And I think it's all, I mean, I say this as someone who has a business as my sort of journalistic background. If you understand business, and particularly the business that you are in, it will just make you a better reporter. Charging for news online is incredibly expensive because actually, you know, building a paywall, maintaining it, having a subscription system, those are all really big costs. And it just doesn't make sense for most businesses to do that rather than look at the advertising model. Advertising's kind of supported a lot of news investment very well in the past, albeit in a mixed model through broadcast news, you know, newspapers. The actual cost of the physical object is rarely, if ever, covers the cost of the content. I think in most broadsheet newspapers it used to be 70% was advertising, 30% was cover price. It's now like 50-50, but you're still not covering the cost of the journalism. So it's a really complicated question, and I think it's very important that all news organisations play around with the idea of what's sustainable and what actually makes sense in terms of an economic model. I think what will be interesting in developing economies is how low-cost mobile technologies take the place of physical kind of print distribution. I think there will be places, a little bit like landlines for telephones, there will be places that we'll probably never see kind of like widely distributed newspapers. I mean, India's not one of them because that's got actually had a really sort of booming print market. But the issue of access to news and the issue of how you connect your citizens is not something that journalism can solve on its own. You know, these are issues for education, these are issues for government, you know, these are issues that go much more widely than just about journalism. Journalism is the mechanism for sort of delivering it. But I think that, you know, you need a, if you like, a kind of a more holistic approach, probably sort of from government level. If you just post a story on the web, why isn't it digital journalism? I used to have a phrase that I deployed at The Guardian, which I stole from our chief technology strategist, which is being of the web, not just on the web. And I think what you're describing in terms of what's described in terms of a story that sits on the internet and does nothing is not really digital journalism, because it doesn't acknowledge the presence of conversation and reaction around it. It doesn't acknowledge the fact that stories change all the time and need to be updated. It doesn't acknowledge the fact that there are sources out there that can be linked to. It doesn't acknowledge the fact that once you press publish these days, there is a process involved in journalism which goes beyond the actual publishing of the story, and that may well be curation, it may well be sending a link to the story to other blogs, it may well be engaging with commenters, it may well be updating the story. You know, digital journalism is about creating a, you know, living sort of atom of news rather than a finished article, and that's absolutely the key difference. The skills you need are much more those of a sort of, if you like, a bartender or a retailer. Everyone who comes to your article and leaves a comment on it is kind of like is like somebody wandering into your shop or your bar, and some people are just there to make trouble and you don't want them there, and you have to find a way of removing them without upsetting everybody and calling the police. And the other people who are there, you really want to kind of, make sure that that you're engaging with them, that you're not, and because if you do this, if you do it well, it does undoubtedly improve your journalism. You are likely to find out things that you didn't know before. You're likely to be fed story or context that you possibly wouldn't have come across otherwise. You're likely to aggregate a much better audience for your work, which, you can't monetize anything unless you have an audience. You build loyalty, you build following, etc., etc., etc. The problem, I think, for journalists is that they're often being asked to do this in an unrealistic way, given all the other pressures of their work, which is a management issue about understanding how journalists should spend their time. I think that the difference probably, certainly with The Atlantic and The Guardian, and as I say, other publications as well, which I think have been successful, is engaging with the web audience on its terms and not wanting it to be something other than it is. In other words, not sort of, you have to lose the print mentality at that point. And that, I think, is why it's successful. The other thing, which is simple and not really talked about that much, is that I suspect that they have, I don't know, but I suspect they have great technologists and great creative developers at The Atlantic, and I suspect that they are heavily involved in editorial conversations, because that is the other thing which totally makes online success, which is having an integrated approach where you hear and you take notice of people who are expert in, as I say, what are really journalistic skills, but have their basis, in coding rather than writing. There is this sort of completely false, I think, impression given that the things that really work on the web. I mean, yes, there's kind of, there's a huge audience for instant celebrity-driven search engine optimized stuff. But if you look at kind of, audiences over time, a lot of the really big web audiences do actually gravitate to the higher quality content. If you produce the best thing about X subject or Y subject on the web, you will get a big audience for it. And I think that, as the news business begins to realize this, it should get the publishing sort of cycle nailed in a much more sensible way, where it's providing people with live, real-time updates, but it's not forcing out lots of kind of, instant and not particularly great articles, where it's actually kind of, if you like, the middle economy of news, which is really that problematic bit that we're talking about. It's never going to disappear, but it should become squeezed, and so you have the instant update, which everybody wants. Everybody wants to know how many miners have been saved right now, But the other bit of it, which is the enduring bit, which is the analysis, the longer reported piece, the multimedia kind of, sort of story that you tell over time, the database, you have to produce those in a high quality way to actually attract and hold an audience.